Welcome everyone, and I would like to thank you for being here. I would very much like to thank you for responding to our call to be on time. And good evening. My name is Eva Fotiadi, and on behalf of the co-organizers Thais Viti and Margaret Talley of the symposium event in Artistic and Political Practices, I would like to welcome you all here tonight. Now, it is a great honor and it's a great pleasure for us to host for this first lecture Professor Alain Badiou, a philosopher whose thinking has been inspiring and intriguing for a great number of researchers, academic researchers, artists, activists, and a lot of others, and with whom we start the symposium here tonight. And it is with great joy and enthusiasm that we see also how many of you, the public and participants of this lecture and this symposium, have responded to the invitation to follow us during these 3 days. We thank you all for your interest, for your presence, and for your contribution. Now, let me start with just a couple of words as a way of opening this symposium, the symposium event in Artistic and Political Practices. And within maximum 3 minutes, I'm going to leave the floor to Jos de Blois, who is going to be our moderator for tonight and who is going to introduce Professor Alain Badiou. Now, within a world that has been witnessing overwhelming political, economic, and social events over the past few years, many of which connected to conflicts and to crises, within an academic world of the humanities that has been trying to respond intellectually to these events with varying degrees of success, and also to respond to a feeling of exhaustion sometimes towards its own critical approaches that have prompted debates in the last 2-3 decades, but which do not feel or they do not appear to be sufficient in the current situation, and also within a world of art production and art circulation, the outcomes of which increasingly confront us with the question, how does this work? How does this work operate? What does it do? Even more so when it comes to the outcomes of artistic practices which are performative, event-based, or hybrid in character. So within this broad context, it felt relevant, if not to say quite urgent, to go back to the concept of the event itself and to take a couple of days out of our regular routine to reflect on it. The concept of event has a rich and very long background in philosophy and in aesthetics, and a continuously discussed history in 20th century art and politics. We are very grateful as organizers of the events of the following 3 days, well, tonight and the following 2 days, to have received a large amount of extremely interesting papers of researchers and of artists who share similar interests and questions. And we are extremely grateful to have also invited and have had a positive response of extremely interesting also keynote speakers, the first of which is the one that we are going to listen to tonight. So this is a very short introduction to the symposium. Before leaving the podium and leaving it to Jos de Blois, I would like to thank for their support in many ways, not only financially, but also in terms of time, enthusiasm, and experience, the organizing partners of these events. And namely, they are the Lectorate for Art and Public Spaces of the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, the Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis of the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands Institute for Cultural Analysis, the Mondrian Fund, the Artistic Research Masters in The Hague, the Stedelijk Museum Bureau Amsterdam, and the French Institute. We very much thank you all. And now it is time that I can leave the floor to Joost to introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you very much for coming.
In Éloge de l'amour, in Praise of Love, Alain Badiou writes that philosophy is a demanding activity. I quote, "To be a scientist, artist, militant, and lover, those are the roles that philosophy demands from its subject. Tonight we will, hopefully, see the philosophical subject Alain Badiou in at least one of these roles, that of the artist. Alain Badiou is not only one of today's most debated, quoted, and to an extent feared philosophers, he is also an artist in his own right, a novelist and a playwright. It is vital for the understanding of Badiou's thinking of art to acknowledge the rigorous distinction Badiou makes between what he calls the four truth procedures: politics, science, love, and art. Even if they share the same name, in this case Alain Badiou, the philosopher and the artist can never be one and the same person. In fact, Badiou's philosophy of art sets itself radically apart from what we know as aesthetics. Badiou describes the traditional relation between philosophy and art as that of the master and the hysteric. In this relation, art acts as the hysteric that needs the master philosopher to unveil her own truth to her. "Tell me who I am," art begs philosophy, Badiou writes in the Petit Manuel d'Inesthétique. For Badiou, it is obvious that this relation translates a fantasy on behalf of philosophy. It is the lack of a truth in art that, at the same time, posits philosophy as the sole producer of truth. Against this constitutive fable of the philosophy of art, Badiou introduces his inesthetics, a philosophy of art that no longer thinks instead of art, but with art. This brings us, I think, to the heart of Badiou's conception of philosophy. For Badiou, philosophy certainly represents a desire for truth, but it emphatically does not produce truth. Philosophy is conditional. It operates under the condition of the four truth procedures, of which art is, alongside politics, the procedure that Badiou has perhaps written most about. It is the task of philosophy to conceptualize truth, in plural, that are produced elsewhere. Truth is not the exclusive domain of philosophy. Art, as much as politics, science, or love, thinks, Badiou says. Art thinks not by mimicking philosophy, but by its proper means. It produces truth through aesthetic means, that is to say, through a transformation of the sensible. This explains, no doubt, why when Badiou refers to art as truth procedure, the thoughts produced by art, he very rarely, if ever, refers to conceptual art or contemporary art that massively refers to theorists such as Alain Badiou. If he speaks of the artistic truth procedure, it is because, as truth procedure, art cannot be reduced to any other authority than its own. For Badiou, aesthetics is, in a sense, a very modest activity. It attempts to grasp and name the passage of ideas of truth in art. And we should add that, in Badiou, art is never one. If Badiou speaks of truth procedures, in plural, it is because for him truths are multiple. That is not to say that truths are relative, it is precisely the multiplicity of truth that is unconditional. With Badiou, we can say that the multiplicity of the arts, poetry, painting, cinema, theater, music, dance, testifies to the multiplicity of the truth procedures. Each form of art operates differently on the sensible. Each form of art produces its truth differently. So it is anything but a matter of art with a capital A reflecting on its own inherent truth with a capital T. Truth, in Badiou, emerges in a rupture with the status quo. It is a truth precisely because it is irreducible to anything prior to its emergence in, or rather, with the event. Truths are never merely incarnated as the Christian/romantic ideal has it. Badiou speaks of truth procedures because truths need to be actively endorsed by a subject that provides these truths with a substance or form, and that in turn is formed by this endorsement. To give one of Badiou's recurrent examples, it is the Schoenberg event that breaks with the centuries-old principle or status quo of tonality. It inaugurates a truth procedure that we know as serial or atonal music, a truth that is endorsed by the subjects that are the works of composers such as Berg or Cage, that form an artistic configuration whose truth can precisely be identified by inesthetics. and equally crucially by the newly born subjectivity of the listener, who is as much carried away by this entirely new conception of music. Truth presupposes the fidelity of the subject that is constitutive of, and in turn constituted by, that truth. The Schoenberg event opens up at least the possibility of a truth procedure in the domain of the audible. Badiou emphasizes, and this is, I think, where he radically parts from the thought of, for example, Jacques Rancière, he emphasizes the eternity and infinity of truth. The work of art, the subject of an artistic truth, is a finite piece of an infinite truth. Infinite in the sense that it breaks with the status quo, with the idea that the truth is intrinsically limited for being governed by a law of sorts. Now, perhaps the core question of Badiou's philosophy is that of the interweaving of the truth procedures. There is no coincidence between the truth procedures, they are not equivalent, but they can relate, even intimately, to one another. I would like to briefly consider the possibility of such a relation, but taking a very brief look indeed at Badiou's recently published play, L'Incident d'Antioche, The Incident at Antioch. It is precisely in the incident at Antioch that the issue of the possible interweaving of the truth procedures of art and politics is at stake. At least that's my view. I'm not sure if it's Alain Badiou's view, but nonetheless. The play simultaneously addresses the question of the possibility of a contemporary, say, post-revolutionary politics, and because of that, it necessitates, as Badiou writes, a sort of unknown language, because it is the language that must convey the message of a politics that is only just emerging. It is no surprise that for Badiou, this language is foremost the language of theater. As he writes, of all the arts, theater is the one that most insistently stands next to or presupposes politics. Theater, in fact, interweaves politics and art. Both, for example, relate to the organization of a collective subject, actors and audience, militant organization, or rebellious masses, and to the event of a singular truth in the actual, irrepeatable performance in the unconditional political event. And, as Badiou says, there is no theater without the state. Theater always takes place under the watchful eye of the state. The incident at Antioch stages a political context that is in contrast with the revolutionary setting of Badiou's novels and roman opera L'Écharpe Rouge, The Red Scarf. It stages what we might call a post-revolutionary world, a world in ruins, ravaged by civil war. This world is haunted by one question: what lessons to learn from the ruin of the idea of revolution? The incident at Antioch, no surprise, was written in the 1980s, but only very recently published. The black years, as Badiou calls them, that followed the Red Decade, that roughly spans 1968-1977, in the midst of the consolidation of neoliberal power and the collective mourning for, if not the active disavowing of leftist ideals. The play stages possible responses to the question of what shape a post-revolutionary politics might take. What is a politics that knows the secret blackness in the red, that assumes the impasses of radical equality and emancipation that go under the name of communism, yet, crucially, without disavowing it? That, as Badiou puts it recently, affirms its fidelity to the idea of communism. The most comical, grotesque characters in the play, in fact, embody a certain now dominant left, the third way of the likes of François Mitterrand, Tony Blair, or in this country, Diederik Samson, whom we utter slogans such as, and this is a quote from the play, economic stability has absolutely got to be restored, democracy respected, human rights upheld, investment increased, the currency rescued, immigration, whether controlled or uncontrolled, legal or illegal, strictly limited. This sounds, in fact, as a depressingly accurate depiction of our current situation. There is, of course, no idea of communism in this type of discourse. The incident at Antioch, that the title refers to, the biblical confrontation between Peter and Paul, therefore takes place between two possible communist subjects. Cephas, who equals communism with the revolutionary overtaking of state power, and who is cynical enough to exploit a revolution as spectacle, and Paula, who, as a female Saint Paul, opts for a wholly different conception of a politics of radical equality and emancipation, beyond the logic of state power. It is precisely before the representatives of the state that Paula exclaims, I exist in the splitting of the law, I'm taking place out of place, j'ai lieu hors lieu. Paula attempts to think, in a purely theatrical way, a politics that breaks the law that governs our current conception of politics, that of state power. The value of such a politics cannot be measured by the law of numbers. This politics precisely radically rejects the logic of parliamentary democracy with its sanctifying of the majority and of opinion polls. What do you measure power by? Paula asks. The power of the truth in the banlieues, at the factory gates, on public transport? Truth does not reside in statistics, but in that which is excluded from the law that governs the status quo. In the poll, Paula is designed as the indiscernible one. It is from this not all, as Lacan called woman, from a certain void that truth come into being, and that our world comes into being through the actions of the collective subject that is constituted by this truth. The unprecedented act, Paula says, consists in not seizing a power that is there for taking, because that's how the world will learn that the law has been split in two, and we're no longer burdened by having to take power. Rather than holding on to the idea of revolution as the prelude to empires, Paula opts for a notion of communism that radically dismisses a notion of equality that is possible only insofar as it has the state and capitalist sociality as its guarantors. The idea of communism is to be taught, crucially, at a distance from the state. It asks not for the grand designs of the 20th century state and party communism, but for restricted action as the ineluctable contemporary form of the little political truth that we are capable of. For Paula, such a politics is foremost about making politics exist. As a truth procedure, politics is neither reducible to the infernal logic of state power, nor to the law of value of capitalism, even if this law now extends its global rule. And Paula concludes, the politics of the future initially only involves giving shape and substance to its own formulation. Politics is about uniting people around a political vision, free from the mind control exerted by the state. We're founding a new era on a tautology. In his recent work, Alain Badiou has shown that the possibility of this politics, and perhaps this is the only true politics, is no longer that restricted. In Le Réveil de l'Histoire, The Rebirth of History, Badiou sees the Occupy movement, the Arab Spring, the London riots, as so many preludes to such a politics, but preludes only. They constitute a sort of pre-political, Badiou writes. And for Badiou, thinking the emergence of politics today does not imply going back to an obsolete vocabulary of revolution, he leaves that to the mass media, but thinking the politics, the political truth procedure that sparks from such events as the Arab Spring is perhaps better served, if we may state it in slightly polemical terms, it's perhaps better served by reading Beckett or Mallarmé and by grasping the Schoenberg event, or in fact by reading Badiou. As Alain Badiou writes in Wittgenstein's Anti-Philosophy, the word of the philosopher is authoritarian, it is as seductive as it is violent, it invites to be followed, it disrupts and it converts. I hope that tonight the philosopher Alain Badiou will keep his word and will be as seductive as violent, disruptive, and converts us in this appropriately religious setting. Thank you.
During a long historical sequence, the definition of truth has been the definition given by Aristotle. The truth is the adequation between our mind and the real things. The truth is a good relationship between thinking and reality. Today, the Aristotle's definition of truth becomes a linguistic question in the field of what is named analytic philosophy. A proposition, a judgment, is true if what is said is also what it is, the reality. So a truth is a correct relationship between language and things. I think that a really modern philosophy is a criticism of this definition of truth. Our task is to kill Aristotle. Truth is not adequatio rei et intellectus, to speak Latin, once time only. Truth is not limited to the form of judgment. Truth is not simply a correct relationship between thinking and the things. Hegel first shows that truth is a path, that truth is a constructive process. Heidegger suggests that truth is an historic destiny. For Nietzsche, truth is a poetic creation. For Sartre, truth is a form of freedom. In any case, we have today many possibilities to define truth in another field, that's the relationship between mind and reality. I will start from the following idea. A truth is, first of all, something new. What transmits, what repeats, we shall call knowledge. And distinguishing truth from knowledge is essential. It is a distinction which is already made in the work of Kant, the distinction between reason and understanding. It's a capital distinction for Heidegger, the distinction between truth, in Greek aletheia, and cognition of science, in Greek techne. If all truth is first something new, what is the essential philosophical problem pertaining to truth? It's the problem of its appearance, of its becoming. A truth must be submitted to thought not as a judgment, but as a process in the real. This process is a creative one. We have a birth of a new truth, and it's also a constructive process because we have the new time of the truth, the becoming of the truth. Now, for the process of a truth to begin, something must happen. It's a very important idea. Truth, first, is in relationship not with being, but with happening. Something must happen. What there already is in the form of being of the world, of being of the situation. What is the situation of knowledge as such, common knowledge, only gives us repetition, possibility of repetition. For truth to affirm its newness, there must be a supplement. something which happens. And this supplement is committed to chance. It is unpredictable, uncalculable, it is beyond what is, and I call it an event. A truth appears in its newness because an eventful supplement interrupts repetition. So we have to consider first the negative part of the definition of a truth, negative part which is something which is like an interruption of repetition, something like a rupture in the laws of the world, something new in regard to the common knowledge, which is not reducible to the common knowledge. And we have also to understand the positive part of this definition of a truth, which is that a truth, at the beginning, in the form of an event, is the creation of a new possibility. It's not the creation of a new part of the real, the creation of a new object, or something like that. It's only the creation of a new possibility, a possibility which is not inscribed as a possibility in the common knowledge of the world. Some examples, classical examples. The appearance with Aeschylus of theatrical tragedy in the Greek world, or the irruption with Galileo of mathematical physics, but also an amorous encounter which changes a whole life, or the French Revolution in 1792, which creates a completely new form of politics. As you know, an event is linked to the notion of the undecidable. There is something undecidable in the event. Take that sort of affirmation. This event belongs to the situation. This event is a part of the world. If you can, using the rules of established knowledge, decide that this affirmation, this event is a part of the world as it is true or false, the event will not be an event. It will be calculable within the situation, but nothing, in fact, permits us to say, here begins the truth. We must decide this point. We have a vigor, will have to be made. And this is why a truth begins with that we can name an axiom of truth. An axiom of truth. It begins with a decision. The decision to say that the event has taken place. So we have in an event which is the beginning of a new truth, something negative in the form of undecidability and something affirmative in the form of a decision.